I call it the triangle of doom, the relationship between the CFO, the CEO, and the board. If you're the CFO, you're sitting in the weakest section of that triangle. It's very, very hard to manage. You don't know the conversations going on between the CEO and the board. You're having conversations with the CEO. You might be having conversations with the board, but you're sitting in the weakest seat in the triangle.
You only have partial info at the same time. That's what makes it even trickier. It's like you're out of the group chat.
That's 100% it. You never know the conversations that are going on. And so I think you can develop a little bit of a level of paranoia with everybody in that relationship. And so it's very tricky. It's one of the trickiest parts of the job.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to Run the Numbers, the podcast where we dig into the real stories behind finance leadership, scaling companies, navigating boardrooms, and knowing when to push back as a CFO. Today, I'm joined by Rick Smith, multi-time venture-backed CFO and founder of Bonfire Advisory, to talk about what makes a great CFO, how to build a strong CEO-CFO partnership, and when it's time for a CFO to move on. We're starting with the CEO-CFO dynamic, why the relationship can be tricky, what CEOs think they want in a CFO versus what they actually need, there's a difference, and how to navigate tough conversations when you don't see eye to eye. Then we get into the CFO's role at different company stages, what changes between 20 million, 50 million, and even 100 million plus in revenue. He's done them all. The most common financial mistakes companies make along the way, and how Rick knew when it was time to leave a $300 million revenue company to work with earlier stage businesses. And of course, we talk about Bonfire Advisory, why Rick honed in on Series A and B startups, the rise of the fractional CFO, and how founders can set themselves up for financial success before they need a full-time CFO. This one's packed with real talk, sharp insights, and maybe a story or two about missing money that magically reappeared. Let's get into it. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Here's a question. When was the last time you really had time to focus on growth and not chasing contract renewals, tracking shadow IT spend, or explaining rising software costs to the board? Yikes. The truth is, traditional spend management is broken. If you're still piecing together data from 5 different systems just to figure out what you're actually spending, while vendors keep on pushing those auto renewals and price hikes, my friend, I got a solution for you. That's where Tropic comes in. Tropic is an intelligent spend management solution that consolidates your spend data and processes into one unified offering, enabling insights and decisive action. It doesn't just show you where the problems are, it helps you solve them. From spotting hidden optimization opportunities like duplicative spend, to automating those painful procurement workflows, to giving you the best market data that turns every vendor negotiation in your favor. Tropic combines smart insights with real human expertise to keep you ahead of the curve. And I can say firsthand because I've used them for over 2 years. Their SaaS platform helps me with price checks. It helps me keep my calendar organized of when renewals are coming up and I can actually visualize it. And let me say, it saves me more than 10 hours a week on vendor management, and we've saved a ton on renewals. I'm walking into the boardroom with a lot more confidence. Isn't it time to turn your spend management into your competitive advantage? Visit tropicapp.io/mostlymetrics. That's tropicapp.io/mostlymetrics. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market. Rates will rise, rates will fall. Can someone please just invent a crystal ball already? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their companies with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. Whether you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If you listen to this podcast, you'll know I ask CFOs all the time to rep their tech stacks, and I would say almost every one of them use NetSuite. And that's what I would use too. Whether you're a company earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/metrics. The guide is free to you. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, it's netsuite.com/metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report with accuracy? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built solutions for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks with minimal IT involvement, enabling seamless collaboration across your organization's key financial workflows. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unmatched scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Visit planful.com/metrics to see how you can elevate your team this year with Planful. They will hook you up. It is planful.com/metrics. Tell me your boy CJ sent you. Planful.com/metrics. Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast. I'm here with Rick Smith. Rick, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
I did this thing where right before the podcast, I had 2 heaping bowls of pasta to immediately give me heartburn. Now I'm washing it down with an espresso. I just don't learn.
You know what? It will give you more heartburn. A long conversation with me.
All right, let's do it. I got the Tums ready, and we're gonna rock and roll. And I'm pumped to have you here because I think I was counting. Are you a 5-time CFO?
I have been a CFO of 5 different organizations and across industries, across stages. And then I left that about 2.5 years ago and set up a fractional CFO practice where I work with a lot of different, mostly Series A, Series B, either SaaS software or health technology companies.
Series A and Series B is probably, I don't know, I think it's the most fun place to play, just with the problems they're solving and the scaling issues that come into play.
I would agree. I love that stage, which is why I pretty much that's all I do is focus on that stage.
And you've seen and worked with your fair share of CEOs with that many reps. So what I wanted to start off with is the importance of the CFO and CEO relationship. I think it's one of the hardest parts about being a CFO, getting that right and building it and fostering it over time. Can you add some color as to like what the hallmarks of a good CEO-CFO relationship is and why it's a difficult thing to get right?
Yeah. So first of all, the relationship between a CEO and a CFO is very tricky. Most CEOs aren't experts in finance and accounting, resulting in them managing and evaluating someone with an expertise in areas that they really don't have. Most CEOs have zero interest in the boring stuff that a CFO oversees. So a lot of times I get a little frustrated because you never seem to get credit for nailing the stuff that does take up a lot of time and is super important. It takes up a lot of effort, but it's not the glamorous stuff that CEOs or investors are interested in. And the reality is the personality of a venture and growth stage CEO is typically one of a dreamer who thrives on uncertainty and chaos. I mean, that's how they got in that role. But, most CFOs I know, including myself, we're a little bit more comfortable when things are orderly, consistent, and when we have things in control. And CEOs are always selling a vision of the future. But sitting where I sit as a CFO, all I can focus on is what's been historically delivered and what I believe the company is capable of right now. And then CEOs, I get it. I mean, they're great at spending, and that's how you grow a company. But as a CFO, I'm always afraid to burn too much cash. And I know to outsiders, they probably envision CEOs and CFOs locked arm in arm managing the company and its operations. And in some cases, it might be like that, but it truly depends on the CEO. Some CEOs want the back and forth discussion and debate with their CFO, but others don't. And to be perfectly honest, those types of CEOs often just want doers who will help them get to their vision. And they don't want a thinker who will give them, some push to refine their ideas. And as a CFO, you can only push the CEO if the CEO wants to be pushed. It's funny, as a CFO, a lot of times it's a little hard to figure out the CEO that you are working with. And it's hard to figure out the situation and the best ways to influence them. And when you're interviewing for a CFO job, a lot of times you still can't suss out what type of CEO you're going to be paired up with. And a lot of times you don't know what you're getting into and if there will be personality clashes down the line.
So well said. I've had a couple of friends who said, like, during the interview, like, we totally hit it off. Like, I knew we were going to be tight. And they said, hey, you come in, I'm going to throw you the keys to the car. You're going to run finance, strategy, operations. You're going to have a seat at the table. I need someone who's going to be like, my right hand. And then when they got there, it was like, stay in your box.
Yeah. CEOs, part of, again, why they got to be in the role they're in is they're good at selling, and they're good at creating a story that may or may not be the reality behind the scenes. I had one situation, it was funny. A long time later, I ran into somebody and they basically said, I thought you and the CEO were like best friends. And that wasn't quite the truth. I
Really?
can put on a good show too, but I do the best I can within the confines that I'm in to please my boss, just like anybody does in any job. But what's real might be a little different than what people see.
Luckily, in my last role, I was given a very, very long leash. Sometimes it's actually like, whoa, there's nobody who's going to check this. And it's this weird moment where for the first time, as a first-time CFO, you say, oh, this is the only point in my career where I'm not reporting to another CFO. So it's like how you communicate with them is very different. And I love what you said, Rick, about the like time value of effort and what you put in and like the pat on the back you get. Because some of the most like brutal tasks that I had to undertake that took the most thinking and time were just like, okay, cool. And then the other things that I just flipped together in 2 seconds was like, this is the most amazing thing ever.
I had to tell you one of the most depressing moments. I've had this happen a couple times. One is I was CFO of a venture stage company, and the books were really a mess. And we needed to get through an audit as a part of our, I think our latest round that we had raised, plus our bank was requiring us to get through an audit. And the lift to get the books fixed was huge. And I had like no staff and it was really a heavy lift. And I remember when we finally got our hands on that audit, and I was so proud, and I hit send to our investors. And I remember getting the email back that just said, thanks. It's tough. A lot of these things, they take up a lot of time. They are so stressful. They require so much effort, but it's not the glamorous stuff. So the thanks you get or the appreciation, it's just not there. And as a CFO, that can be kind of a bummer.
Yeah, man. The first audit I did with PwC Big Four audit, like this, they're gonna put this on my grave someday when I die that I did this. And when I sent it to the board, I don't even think I got a thanks. I think they just put it in a file somewhere.
I had another one where I was tasked with doing finding an acquisition for a company I was CFO of, and it took a year. I spoke to hundreds of companies. We went and met personally with like dozens of companies. The company we ultimately ended up buying, it was a really tough acquisition to get done, and the investment banker on the other side was extremely difficult to deal with. And I remember we got that deal done. I found the company. I like executed the whole deal. I negotiated debt with 2 separate banks. And I remember in front of the company when they called up all the executives to thank them, there was no thank you coming my way. And it was heartbreaking. Yeah, it was really depressing. And I mentioned it later to the CEO when I was leaving. I mentioned it to the CEO, and the CEO looked really distraught. Like they looked at me and said, oh, you're right. I screwed that up.
Yeah.
That one hurt. That one hurt a lot.
Sometimes the little things are the big things. And that was a big thing if you think about how long it took.
Yeah, and really, the thank yous, the appreciation, they cost nothing. And so give those freely. You should.
Well, maybe we can expand upon what do you think CEOs think they want in a CFO versus what do they actually need?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a funny story. So I was helping as a fractional CFO sometimes when the company's kind of outgrown me and they're looking to move past me, I help them recruit a CFO, and I'll do that, included in my fee. And so I was helping one of my clients, where I was fractional CFO, recruit a full-time CFO. And I was told that the main VC backer wanted a rock star CFO. You ever see that term like on LinkedIn? We're looking for rock stars. And if you ask many VC firms or CEOs to describe that rock star CFO that they want to hire, they'll gravitate towards the same generic description over and over again. Number one, someone who has an elite academic pedigree. Number two, somebody who scaled multiple businesses and grew their valuations by 10x. Number three, somebody who's super polished in board meetings and can answer 100% of the detailed questions that are thrown at them on the fly. Number four, somebody who can integrate a bunch of acquisitions. Number five, who's an FBA. The list is like comical. And, I'm hearing this when I'm going to do the recruiting, and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, right, there are a ton of those folks out there. But, beyond how unlikely finding that mythical creature is, the truth is that every CFO situation is different. So the appropriate CFO for the situation may not be that mythical creature that the VC thinks it is. It's possible the company may need more of an accounting focused operator who nails the details. Or maybe the company needs someone who may not have the world's best social skills, that won't play well at the country club, but they can drive and build out data initiatives that make understanding an incredibly complicated business simple. Or maybe every situation is different. There's no single requirements list for the CFO that every company needs. If I was going to make a list, it would look like this. Number one, the CFO needs to have a vision for the role. They need to be able to articulate, this is what I'm seeing right now, and this is where we're going to get to. And they need to be able to lay out the priorities in terms of, this is what I'm going to fix immediately, this is what I'm going to fix in the midterm, and this is what I'm going to fix over the long term. Number two, it's hard to find this type of CFO. You need a CFO with a positive attitude. A lot of accounting and finance folks lean a little negative, but if I'm hiring a CFO, I want somebody who's pleasant to be around and who helps me believe we can get there together. Number three, you kind of just mentioned this. You need a CFO with a level of entrepreneurialism and creativity that includes dreaming up and rolling out ways to do things that may be very different than how things have been done in the past. You need that clean sheet person who can just come in and figure stuff out without having to have their hand be held. Number four, at this stage, you need somebody who's willing to be a player coach instead of just being a coach, meaning you need somebody who's willing to do some of the basic work. I always say this. Friends of mine who are CEOs at large companies probably would vomit if they saw some of the stuff I deal with day in and day out. But at this size and scale, you can't just be a coach. There's no staff. Most of my clients have like one or two people in the accounting department, and I'm the FP&A department. So you have to be willing to do the work, and that work might be super basic work. The next piece, again, gets back to what you were saying earlier. You need to have a high level of comfort with ambiguity. The CEO will often send a CFO in a direction that is maybe the correct direction, but there's no guidance or little guidance, and the CFO is just going to have to figure out how to get it done. The next thing I would say is you have to have a high degree of personal accountability and a hatred of failure. I always say that I don't meet a lot of people who hate failure more than me, which is, I think, one of the reasons I've been successful in my career is I truly hate failure. If things aren't working correctly in areas that I'm overseeing, I have nobody else to blame but me. And I will own up to that all day long. I am not a finger pointer at all. I will point the finger straight at me and say, I didn't do this right. The last thing, and this is obvious, right? It's the ability to listen, learn, and adapt. You have to, as a CFO, you have to be observant about the changes that are occurring in your business as it's evolving. And as it grows, everything will change. And so you just have to constantly be listening, learning, and adapting to the new scenarios the company is facing. And you have to be listening to what the other executives and the employees, too, are saying. Otherwise, you won't last very long. You're not going to know it all. And if you're far away from how the work actually gets done, you're really not going to know it all.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. I got a question for you. Is your billing system slowing you down? For most B2B SaaS companies, it's like a total mess. Manual invoices, revenue tracking workarounds, and endless spreadsheets that drain time and create errors. I've seen some ugly spreadsheets in my day. Your billing shouldn't feel like a never-ending math problem. That's where Subscript comes in, the modern billing and revenue recognition platform designed for SaaS finance teams that need both flexibility and accuracy. From automated invoicing and dunning to compliant, transparent revenue recognition and real-time analytics, Subscript eliminates manual work, reduces errors, and gives you a single source of truth for all your financial data. Finance teams using Subscript save over 20 hours a month. Wow! Closing the books faster and making smarter decisions with confidence. Don't let billing hold you back. Start scaling with ease. Learn more and book a free demo today at subscript.com. That's subscript.com. Tell me boy CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Hey, metrics fans. Let me ask you something. Do you know what keeps CFOs and finance teams up at night? Well, it's not the complex analyses or forecasting models. It's the mind-numbing tasks of chasing receipts, reconciling expenses, and juggling 5 different systems just to track company spending. I was talking with a finance leader last week who calculated her team was spending an astonishing 20 hours weekly just on expense administration. That's nearly 1,000 hours annually on low-value tasks. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Rippling Spend. Rippling Spend is the only platform that automatically handles your entire company's spending in one unified system. What makes it different? It's built on Rippling's workforce platform. So when org changes happen, like someone getting promoted or changing departments, all approval workflows, access permissions, and policies update automatically. Picture this. When your marketing director goes on vacation, expense approvals don't sit in their inbox waiting for their return. Instead, they're automatically routed to the right backup approver. No manual delegation needed. Meanwhile, your finance team gets real-time visibility into all company spending with no more month-end surprises. As a Run the Numbers listener, you can get an exclusive demo showing exactly how much time your org would save. Just visit rippling.com/metrics to learn more. That's rippling.com/metrics. Do it, guys. Trust isn't earned, it's demanded. Whether you're a startup founder navigating your first audit or a seasoned security professional scaling your GRC program, proving your commitment to security has never been more critical or complex. That's where Vanta comes in. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks, like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Centralized security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Vanta not only saves you time, it can also save you money. A new IDC white paper found that Vanta customers achieve $535,000 per year in benefits, and the platform pays for itself in just 3 months. Join over 9,000 global companies like Atlassian, Cora, and Factory, who use Vanta to manage risk and improve security in real time. For a limited time, our audience gets $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/metrics. That's vanta.com/metrics for $1,000 off. That's an amazing list. And if I was to play it back as to the one quality that I would look for, it's the hatred of failure. Because if you don't want to fail, you're going to open up the Excel workbook and be the FP&A person. You're going to be a player coach. You're going to have that creativity to get around it. And I'm not saying like you can just test for one thing and you get all the rest. But I remember when I was interviewing, I was pumped when I got the job. And I was like, what made you choose me? Like I was younger than most of the other people you were that I was going up against, et cetera. He said, you just kept talking about you wanted to win. You wanted to win. You wanted to win. And that's kind of stuck with me. Like I didn't realize I was saying it at the time, but it's like just this hatred of losing.
Yeah, early on, I remember when I was a controller, I screwed up something and I went to our CFO and I remember he looked at me and said this. He said, I'm not going to say anything to you because I know that no matter what I say to you is nowhere near as bad as what you're saying to yourself on the inside right now. And I said, that's 100% correct. And I walked out of his office angry and, did a better job going forward. But you got to hate failure. You got to hate mistakes. You got to be a perfectionist on a lot of stuff without being overbearing and controlling.
This is like a total tangent, but my college roommate, Steve Ferreter, if you're listening, he was on ESPN in a rugby tournament. And I remember he threw the ball like over somebody's head and out of bounds. And you heard the announcer go, nobody's angrier at Steve Ferreter right now than Steve Ferreter. And so we still tell him that to this day. And I think it resonates with a lot of people in the professional world where like, if your boss says something, it's like, it pales in comparison to the mean things you're saying to yourself in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. High level of personal accountability. And when I'm hiring, that's a big deal to me. I want people who take their work personally and take the quality of their work personally, meaning at some point, it's not about money. It's not about this. It's not about that. It's about, I personally don't like when I do poor quality work. And I personally want to make sure that what I'm presenting to you is the best product I can give to you.
The accountability piece resonates too, and just being able to say it's my fault, or even if you're covering up for somebody in your team because you don't want them to feel like they shouldn't take a shot next time they're on the court. That's a quality I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I've said that a lot in my career. Is that when the team messes up, it's on me, and when we succeed, it's on them. And I know that sounds hokey and it sounds like some generic-y stuff people write about on LinkedIn, but I've gone down that path a million times in my career where somebody made a mistake, somebody who I highly valued, respected. And, when you're doing the type of work we're doing, the volume is so high that not everything will get done perfectly. And so I have many times in my career gone in and said, I screwed this up when it was somebody on my team. And that's life, and that's fine.
I think it was John McCauley John McCauley, the CFO of Calendly, who told us that, mistakes happen when you're engaged in heroics. And he's right. Like when you're trying to achieve these ambitious goals, stuff will go sideways inevitably. It just tends to look worse when you're the person who's trying to come up with the numbers because it's more of a binary right or wrong.
Yeah, something will always go wrong, and you hope every day that it's something minor, but every once in a while, something major happens, and as a CFO, you got to smile and say, "Oh God," and I own it.
Yeah. What's the first thing you do to establish trust with a new CEO? How do you get off on the right foot?
Yeah. So first of all, I like to think I'm a friendly, likable, chatty person, and not all CFOs have that personality. I was actually in my high school class. I was voted most congenial and most humorous. So, I bring that to the table. But not all CFOs are likable, and I work hard at that, and I work hard at that with the staff too, and with the leadership team. I want the leadership team to like being around me and to trust in me that what I'm doing is always the best for the company. And I always work hard wherever I'm CFO to get to know the staff as much as I can interpersonally. I don't want them to see me as some faceless, mean CFO, chief executive, which they often, see CFOs like that. I overtly will tell a CEO, if I do or say something that you don't agree with, always assume that I had good intent. And to me, that's really important because, again, it gets back to the fact that when I'm saying or doing something, I'm not doing it for me. I have no agendas. I don't want any other job. I don't want to be a CEO. I really just want to be the best CFO I can be. So if I say something or do something that you don't agree with, it's not because I have any agendas or malicious or anything like that. It's my intent is always good.
Rick, what I love in that answer is I asked you about the relationship with the CEO. And first, you actually went to having a great relationship with the staff and the employees. And I think that's so crucial because what goes unsaid is a lot of people over index on just serving their one customer, the CEO, and then they forget about the relationships with the other people in the C-suite and with their staff.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, as an observer of people and in a seat in a company where I get to observe a lot of people, I've seen a lot of executives who are good at managing sideways and up, but not so good at managing down. And I've paid attention to that. And I've seen a lot of CEOs who are kind of the same. They're really great with the investors or maybe the other leaders, but they're not so great with the staff. I don't know what it is. I've always felt like I have a tighter relationship a lot of times with the staff and the people who are doing the work. And I don't know why or what, but I've always had a really cordial relationship with the staff, which I think is rare for a CFO. And so I learned a lot just by forming those relationships because often the people who are closest to the work know what's going on and know how it can best get done. And so me getting to know a lot of the staff has always been, first of all, it's been a pleasure to do it, but it's also been a great way for me to truly know what's going on in the company.
Weird question. Do you think some CEOs will get paranoid that the CFO wants their job?
I think it happens a lot.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why I'm always overt at saying I have no aspirations beyond being the CFO of this company, because I do think sometimes CEOs get very nervous about that. I do.
And I think it makes sense to be somewhat insecure about that because you know the numbers better than anybody else at the company.
Yeah, and if a board or an investment group is unhappy with the CEO, I mean, there's only a couple of places for them to look at a possible, at least in an interim, a possible replacement, and CFO is one of those.
Yeah, it's happened at a couple of big name companies as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Never thought about it that way.
For me personally, I've never seen myself as this amazing strategic operator. When I was graduating from business school, I thought, oh, I'm going to be this great, strategy person and lead companies. But over time, I tended to see that maybe that's not my strength. My strength is making sure the plumbing works and the trains are running. And so I tell CEOs, I'm a good general contractor. Tell me the house you want to build and I'll help you build it. And if you tell me you want to build the house on swampland, I'm going to walk you through why that's probably not a good idea and give you some other options. But I don't see myself as that visionary. I've always seen myself as that general contractor helping you build this house.
Well, let's talk about swampland. Have you ever had to push back hard on a CEO's decision or direction?
I have, and it's not fun. It's really hard. So first of all, one of the things I've gotten really good at recognizing in my job is if the board and the CEO are aligned with each other on the vision, and I disagree with it, that's fine. It's their company. They're the investors. They're my boss. I'm totally fine with that. They get to make the call. That's why, they're the CEO and they're the board and investors and I'm not. The one caveat, of course, is if a CEO wants to do something unethical, that becomes a real problem for me. And one of the things people forget is although the CEO is my boss, I also have a fiduciary responsibility to the board and the investors. And so if I think the CEO is doing something unethical, that's a conversation that I have to have with the board. And that's just how it goes. But I've had some times where, I'm struggling with what the CEO is doing or saying, and I'm not certain that the board is aware of what the CEO is doing or saying. And so, you have to tackle that head on with the board. You have to.
Can we dig into that? Because we spoke to Dave Kellogg of Kellblog fame a while back about, is the board the CFO's boss? And on paper, no, they're not. But you pointed out something that's also true. They have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders.
Yeah, it's really hard. So when I'm communicating with the board, the last thing you want to do is say something the CEO is not aware of that you're communicating to the board. You always have to be aligned with your CEO. But again, you don't want the board or investors looking at you and saying CEO was doing something untoward and so were you. I mean, that's not good. So I do feel like, the board and the investors are partially my boss. And if one boss is behaving in a way that is problematic, I have to talk to the other boss about it. I have to. Otherwise, I'm complicit. Can't have that happen.
Man, that's got to be like a hard thing to go back and forth in your mind. Because like you said, you can't bounce it off your boss, the CEO, because they're the one in question. And you also don't want to undermine any sort of trust that you've built so far. So you have to do this calculation in your head of like, is this the right time to bring it up and is it worth it?
Yeah, you do. And you have to realize if you go run to the board that you might be out of a job. That's very possible. But at the same time, you have to be true to yourself and what you believe in. And I would rather have a CEO fire me if I was doing the right thing and going the board. That's fine. I'll go do something else. And hopefully the board and investors will recognize that. And, they'll be a good reference for me or they'll have something else for me. But you have to do what you think is right. You have to have a strong ethical backbone. And a lot of people think they do until they're in these situations and you realize how tough it is and how tricky it is. But whatever, I always want to do the right thing.
Tactically speaking, Rick, if you are in a situation where you have to get input from the board on something that involves the CEO in some way, do you pick up the phone and have a conversation with the one you're closest with? Do you put it in email just to like legally cover yourself? Like, how do you deal with that communication wise?
Yeah, it is funny. Now you bring up something that's interesting. As a CFO, there's a lot of times where you actually want stuff documented just in case things go bad, right? And so I'll start to keep a diary and I'll start to take notes. And in that situation, I think I'm starting on the phone and then I would go to the email. But you really, at some point, you do have to protect yourself. And so at a minimum, start keeping a diary of what your viewpoint is on the situation and make sure that you're protected. By the way, nobody talks about this stuff. Most CFOs I know who've been CFOs, a couple of times, they'll understand what I'm talking about. This happens and you have to be careful.
Yeah.
You do.
This is the inside baseball that people come to the podcast for. And it's not talked about enough because like, there is that risk too, where you document it and then the board member just forwards it to the CEO and something like with tone gets lost out of context. Like it's a very tricky thing to walk in the moment.
It is. Yeah. Usually I have a pretty nice relationship with at least one board member, if not, multiple board members. So usually I feel like if I need to pick up the phone and have a very honest conversation, it'll be fine. But at some point you're going to want to document some stuff. So at a minimum, keep a diary and keep some notes.
And how do you manage the dynamics where the board starts to get involved and either they're looking at the CEO as, hey, it might not be your time anymore, or we disagree with something that you're doing? Because a lot of times you'll have that in the trenches relationship where the CEO, where I got your back, you got my back, and you kind of feel like you got to pick sides. But like you said, they have ownership in the company.
Yeah. So it is funny, and we haven't talked about my book, but I do discuss this in my book. I call it the triangle of doom, the relationship between the CFO, the CEO, and the board. If you're the CFO, you're sitting in the weakest section of that triangle. It's very, very hard to manage. You don't know the conversations going on between the CEO and the board. You're having conversations with the CEO. You might be having conversations with the board, but you're sitting in the weakest seat in the triangle, and that's why I call it the triangle of doom. From the CFO's perspective, it's a triangle of doom. It's very hard to manage. It really is. It's one of the hardest aspects of the job.
Can you say more about the triangle of doom? I'm so fascinated now.
You're going to use this term, I think,
I'm totally
forward.
going to use it. Don't worry. I'll cite you in my bibliography.
It's that tricky relationship. It's like three people trying to be friends with each other in high school, right?
But you only have partial info at the same time. That's what makes it even trickier. It's like you're out of the group chat.
That's 100% it. You never know the conversations that are going on. And so I think it can develop a little bit of a level of paranoia with everybody in that relationship. And so it's very tricky. It's one of the trickiest parts of the job. What is your real relationship with the CEO? They might be telling you one thing, but that might not be reality. And what is your relationship with the board, and what is their perception of you? They might be telling you one thing, and that might not be reality either. So it's very tricky. I want to have trusting relationships where you always have somebody's back. I really want that. But sometimes it's just not reality when there's a lot of money at stake and people are nervous about their jobs and their reputations and stuff. It's very hard.
And something that also complicates the dynamics is a lot of times in venture-backed companies, at least, a lot of these VC companies are becoming in-house recruiting firms. So they may technically bring you in or source you, or it may be a VC who invested in the company that you have a personal relationship to. So there's that link. Yeah. But at the same time, you're reporting to the CEO. So it can get messy.
Yeah. It's funny, actually, in my fractional CFO practice. So the vast majority of the time, I'm brought in by the VC. And it makes the CEO slightly nervous.
Yeah.
And they've asked this question. How much are you saying to the VCs? How often are you talking to them? And the thing that is actually surprising is a lot less than you think. They have other stuff going on, and they bring me in because they trust in me, but they aren't bringing me in to sit there and, get them a bunch of information. But if they ask me questions, I'll certainly answer those questions very honestly. But I actually prefer to be brought in by the VC because a lot of times founders, when a VC says, here's a CFO, there's two reasons to it. One reason could be that the job is starting to outgrow the founder. Mm-hmm. That is one reason. Or the other is just things are messy and they know that they need some CFO help. In either case, it probably doesn't reflect that well on the founder, because the founder let it get to a certain size and scale where things are a little bit messy. And, the reality is that a lot of VC founders don't last. I mean, they're great at founding a business, but they aren't great at running it once it scales. Just like a lot of super early stage CFOs aren't great at scaling the CFO role. The reality is that some people can adapt and grow as the business grows, but a lot, they're great at one stage. And so, there's a time for them to graduate. Most founders, it's very hard for them to leave a business.
It is. Yeah. And we're going to get to those stages in a second. But one more question on the CEO-CFO dynamic here. So let's just say you don't see eye to eye. It's time to go and pick up your ball and go play a different game. What's the best way to do that?
I mean, for me, at some point, if I'm not getting along with the CEO and I know that it's just never going to work out, I personally want to be happy and I want to enjoy the work I'm doing. And being in a situation, especially with how tight a CEO and a CFO need to be, being in a situation where it's not working out, I mean, that makes me unhappy every day. And, it's funny, my wife and kids will start to look at me and they'll be like, Dad's not very happy right now. And the minute they're feeling it, then I got to go do something else. And, I won't sacrifice my own happiness and mental health just to stay on a job. So I'd rather go and do something else. I try to be super courteous if I'm going to leave a business because the CFO role is very tough to fill. So I either try to make sure kind of things are running on autopilot or, give enough notice where they can bring in somebody else and just walk them through why I'm leaving. I don't want to leave anybody high and dry, especially if I have a nice relationship with the investors. But I don't want to stick around in a situation that doesn't work for me. It's actually one of the reasons, honestly, I've enjoyed being a fractional is because if I get into a fractional situation I'm not happy with, glad to go do something else,
right.
And I'll work, I tend to operate, actually, I designed it this way. I tend to operate around 3-month agreements with my clients, meaning we kind of renew the relationship every 3 months because if they're not happy with me or I'm not happy with them, that's fine. It's a short-term engagement. Don't worry about it. And I want to be happy and I want them to be happy with whoever they're working with.
That's awesome. Let's talk about the stages of both CFOs and companies. So, Rick, you've been CFO of companies ranging from 20 million in revenue to 300 million. That's quite the range. Do you tend to bucket them in different phases of being a CFO at different sizes?
I do, but there is a nuance and that's the complexity of the business because, you can have a 50 million SaaS software business with, large ACV clients and 50 employees, and it's not that complicated. Conversely, you could have a 5 million in revenues business with tons and tons of small clients and 100 employees stretched across 3 offices in multiple countries. And that's a lot of complexity. And so while I do tend to bucket them, like 0 to 20 million, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 plus, the nuances, the complexity underneath it can skew that in one direction or another.
So if I were to play it back to you, there's probably not like a cookie cutter at this stage you bring in a CFO.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I work with, so one kind of specialty I have is working with health tech services businesses, tech-enabled services. And the nuance is that their revenues are generated through insurance claims. I cannot tell you the complexity those businesses have at 5 million in revenues just because their client base is basically, their revenues are generated, $200, $250 per claim at a time. And a lot of those claims get rejected and have to get followed up on. So the complexity is really high versus, again, a SaaS software company. If your ACV is $400,000, you can have, a decent sized business with 20 clients and not a lot of employees. It's low complexity. So I think that's the nuance. International is the other complexity. The minute you add an international component, complexity triples. And so that's kind of the other nuance. But I think, to keep things simple, I do tend to bucket them just because a lot of times that's the type of conversation you have, 0 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 plus. And the job changes too as you grow, by the way. It changes a lot because once you get to 50 million, organic growth gets tougher and tougher. So at that point, you're probably doing some M&A, which is a beast in and of itself, totally different beast. And then at some point, you're also going international, which is, again, a kind of a beast in and of itself. And so the job changes. It's a different job. It might not be harder or easier, but it's a different job, and the complexity goes up. And you have to have skill sets in M&A, and you have to have skill sets in international.
I think where the rubber hits the road and it gets complex early on is depending on how the company makes money in a lot of cases. Like, are you monetizing through just, $25,000 to $50,000 ACV ARR deals, and it's a field Salesforce model where it's like, I hire this many BDRs and field salespeople, I get this out? Or is it like a usage-based marketplace where it's like 10-dimensional chess?
Yeah, it's the complexity. And, how you define complexity is going to change by industry or by business. But to me, it's the complexity that drives when you need a first CFO versus when you don't. That being said, no matter what, if I was an early stage company, I would always try to find a competent fractional CFO to help you, even if it's just like on a small basis to help you think 3 or 4 steps ahead. Because most of the time when a client engages me, they might be at a Series A or Series B. They've made a lot of mistakes. And one of the challenges you get then is going back and fixing stuff, which is super non-value added, but it's got to get done. And so the thing I always remind people, which accountants will understand, is that your balance sheet has memory. If you go to the equity section on a balance sheet, it never forgets anything from the day the business was created. If you go to the equity section or fixed assets or whatever, the income statement might not have memory. It'll forget what happened last year. But the balance sheet has memory going back to day one. So if you have to go back and fix accounting going all the way back to day one, and this company's grown a lot, and maybe they've had some different bookkeepers who had a different approach, it's going to be a mess. And then the other thing that's probably going to be a mess is the cap table.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Yeah, and I would say I had when I say a hot streak, I mean this negatively, but I had a hot streak going of about 3 or 4 companies in a row where the cap tables were wrong.
Wrong? Not complicated, wrong.
Something was wrong on them. Usually it's employees were told they had an options grant, but it never made its way onto the cap table. It might have even been approved of by the board, but it didn't make its way on the cap table. And CFOs will appreciate this, and that is, if you don't issue the options when you needed to issue them, and then new 409A valuations have come along and they've come in higher, you have a problem. You can't go back and issue options from 3 years ago at a different 409A valuation. So then you have to solve it. Well, you had vesting too. And so you have to get like special rules for that person's grant to solve vesting and valuation and all this stuff. But I've had numerous cases where something was missing from the cap table. And I had one where the company was keeping a cap table in a spreadsheet, and The first cell I looked at was doubled up. The first one, it was doubled up, and I'm like, oh God, this isn't good, And so I think that those are things that, again, you need some fractional help up front to think through these types of things so that mistakes aren't made early that have to get fixed later.
Balance sheets are like elephants. They don't forget.
They don't forget.
Rick, what's one of the most common mistakes you see for companies of the stage and ilk that you deal with?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times as companies get larger and they're facing rapid growth, they all make the same mistake. They hire people way too far ahead of the curve, or they sign leases on space that is way more. Actually, I'll take that in two directions: more than they need or not enough. And they sign a long-term lease. And then when things don't work out, they lay off a bunch of people and they're stuck with too much empty space. And often if you sign a fresh lease, it's 7 to 10 year term. I mean, a lot of companies don't even know where they're going to be 24 months from now. But if you want to sign a fresh lease, it's going to be 7 to 10 years. It's very hard to figure out your space needs. But the hiring people, I mean, we see this all the time in the press. Famous tech company was growing like crazy, and then suddenly they're laying off 20% of their workforce. They hired too far ahead of the curve. The most important thing I feel like I do as a CFO is forecasting. And in software and services, usually the hardest part is timing and figuring out the size of new client wins. Like how much are you going to win? How big will it be? When are you going to win it? And also when client churn might occur, when a client quits. Because you have to gate your hiring to match your revenues. And there's always these animal spirits in a company. We need to hire. Every department needs to hire. And as the CFO, you've got to do your best to counterbalance the animal spirits among your leadership team that are pushing you to hire ahead of the curve. And you've got to be really just smart about it. There's always an inertia to hire, and it's very hard to fire. So do your best to counterbalance the inertia, but do it in a way that doesn't truly inhibit the company from growing.
What's funny is most CFOs I talk to, they have the same quip every time. I wish they brought me in 6 months earlier, because there's that collateral damage they have to clean up. But also one of the mistakes that companies make is they hire everybody else too early, or they push and push and push without using like a revenue-based approach to it. I really like how you called out that it can't just be on vibes, right? It can't be like, I think we need a product manager because, we're going to come up against X, Y, or Z. It has to be substantiated and linked to the plan in some way, or else it's going to fall by the wayside.
Yeah, some departments it's really easy, like sales, they're going to have a quota, right? And probably a large portion of their comp will be variable. And so, basically, here's what we're going to target in bookings for the year. So let's break that down on how many meetings you have to have and, success rate and, really go through the funnel math of a pipeline to figure out a quota and then, what percentage of our reps hit quota. So you can work through that math to figure it all out, which is helpful. I think where it gets harder is a lot of engineering jobs, or as you said, marketing. It gets a little harder because there's not necessarily a metric that you can attach to hiring. So it gets to be a little bit more on feel. It's funny, as a CFO, I think over time you start to figure out which of your leaders will constantly over ask for staff and expect it to get down dialed. And then I love these leaders, God love them, the leaders who ask for nothing and no one. It's kind of crazy, but sometimes you get those people. And a lot of times you have to push them to hire, which is funny. But you get better over time when you build those relationships to understand which your people are over asking, which are under asking, and what is the right number. But I'm almost reforecasting my businesses from in the first month of the year. You create a budget often in November, December, and it's stale by Jan or Feb. So I'm constantly reforecasting my businesses, in particular the revenues and in the near term, so we can gate hiring if we need to, if things aren't emerging as we expected them to emerge.
I heard you say in a different podcast that the squeaky wheel often gets the grease, and that is something that a CFO has to manage, that the loudest usually gets allocated the headcount, but it may not be the best use.
I've had that a lot. There's every company has one squeaky wheel at least who's constantly asking and pushing for more headcount. But that's not fair. I mean, to me, the question is always, collectively as a leadership team, let's decide. If we have $100,000 or $200,000 or whatever to go spend, are we doing it in people or stuff? And if it's people, which department? If it's stuff, which stuff? But let's collectively decide it, because I don't want the squeaky wheels to always win. It's wrong, and it's just counterproductive.
Isn't it so it's not unnerving, but it's just a very odd dynamic when you're pushing someone to hire. Like, we had this incredible person who ran our data cataloging department, which was very crucial to what we did as a marketplace. And I swear, it was like pulling teeth out of him just to get him to hire one person.
Yeah, I've had that before too. It's funny. I had a product guy a couple of years ago. Every year we budget 2 or 3 people in his department. He hired nobody, and they got it done. Again, God love them, but it's not great, and it's not scalable at some point. At some point, you have to add staff to grow.
Well, let's talk about the arc of a CFO and the different types of CFOs you need at different stages. Do you think that there is this unicorn CFO who can take you from like point A to IPO, or is that like a fable?
Let me take out the IPO portion.
Okay.
Because that is a very unique animal too. And it's something I've never dealt with. By the way, I always laugh about this. Every time a recruiter calls me, they always tell me the company's going to eventually IPO. And when I look backwards at all the companies that, have pinged me, I think none have, IPO'd. Everybody gets bought at some point, usually merged or bought or something like that. I think that the unicorn CFO occasionally happens, but I think it's a very, very rare because I think the job changes so much. At early stages, there's a significant bookkeeping role in early stages and just setting the table for the future. I think as a company grows, you're starting to get on the scalable systems. You're starting to build out the team. But over time, the role changes a lot where it flips to being management a lot of times where I transition from doing a lot of the work to handing off the work. Not everybody is great at making that transition. And weirdly, in some ways, the job becomes very much an FP&A, M&A, international, and pleasing our investors job. You're not that tied to the accounting. But here's where it gets strange. At some point, I feel like if you're part of a really big company, the job flips in some cases to being very much an accounting role. Because if you go public, there's that SEC component. And suddenly you're doing quarterly earnings and stuff like that. There's a huge accounting component to being a public company CFO that if you're a private company CFO, you might not have to focus as much of your time on that. So the job changes so much. And some of these things are very unique animals. Doing M&A, again, doing international, working on big facilities leases, those are very, very different than early stage setting up accounting systems, setting up, some financial reporting and stuff like that. The jobs are just very different. So are those unicorns out there? Of course they are. Are they common? I would say no.
And you even see it in the public markets where you could be a company of massive scale and you, once again, reach a point where you need a new CFO.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, honestly, CFOs should be honest with themselves and not take that so personally. And I think as a CFO, a lot of times I'll say to myself, I love being here, but I would only want to be here up to this size and scale. And then I would switch. So to give you an example, I was CFO of a company that was $300 million in revenues. We got purchased by a private equity firm. And I did not enjoy the new private equity firm one bit. First meeting, I was like, I don't want to work for these guys. And 4 months later, I was leaving. And I think most people in my situation would have said, well, geez, you're a CFO of a $300 million company. Wouldn't you go find another $300 million company? I don't love that work. I went to a company that was $60 million in revenues. I went straight down market. It's where I feel comfortable. It's where I have the most fun. It's where I enjoy the business. So that was a good size for me to do it. Again, it's not as cool at a cocktail party to say you're CFO of a $60 million company than a $300 million company, but it's what I like. So, again, I got to be true to myself, and that's what I wanted to go do.
I'm so glad you gave us that honest reflection because I've had people come to me and say, hey, look, you got this company to be acquired. Now you get to level up and play the next game. And I'm like, that sounds cool, but like, am I really doing it just for the trophies of getting to play a larger game? Or should I do it where I feel like I have the best CJ market fit?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Every once in a while, a recruiter will call me and they'll toss out a pretty big, company. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I want to take a crack at that once in my life.
Right.
But what I know will happen is I'll go through the interview process. And first of all, I probably won't love it, but I'll be that wild card person that they're speaking to where they're probably not going to hire me because I'm not going to walk in the door having done something that large. It's you got to do what you like doing. I'm passionate about the CFO job. I love it, but only in the right circumstances. Otherwise, I don't love it at all, and I want to have that smile on my face every day, and I want to be passionate about the work, and I want to feel good about what I'm doing, and screw the money. The money will work out for me, whatever. I want to enjoy the work.
And what makes you enjoy the Series A and B range to work with? Because that's definitely where you've honed in and found your entrepreneurial product market fit with Bonfire, it seems.
Yeah. So I do tend to be, even though I was down dialing this earlier, I do tend to be a bit of a jack of all trades where I'm good at a lot of stuff. And to be successful at that stage, you kind of have to be good at 20 things because anything can get thrown your way and you're the only person who's going to have an answer. And I can talk ad nauseum about accounting, about FP&A, about international, about, honestly, I don't even like tax. I can talk about tax, leases, healthcare benefits, 401k, keep going. Like, I love the breadth that the job has because a lot of times when you're CFO of a larger company, what you're focusing on is a lot narrower. I also appreciate if we need to fix something, the timelines we're talking about might be 3 to 6 months on the long end. If you're at a large company and you wanted a systems conversion, you're talking 12 to 24 months. I know this sounds funny. I kind of like not having big teams. I prefer that because I think I can get a lot more done with like 1 or 2 amazing people. In a big company, you need probably 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 amazing people, and it's pretty hard to find 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 amazing people. And the job is so much more just managing them, which I love being a part of the work. And so I've always enjoyed this size more. It doesn't mean I couldn't find an amazing, 100 million revenue company that I would love to be at or whatever. But in general, at early stages, you can get a lot more done faster with a smaller group of people. And the job is interesting to me because it has so many different flavors. And I like having all those different flavors just around.
So you wrote a book. I've never written a book. How long does it take?
Yeah, so this was a little unique because I've probably written this book over 10 to 15 years, just a couple of paragraphs, a couple of pages at a time here and there. Sometimes I would get really excited about a topic and sit down and just bang out a chapter. But a lot of times for me, I was doing this paragraph by paragraph, page by page. I think it's 350 pages. So I did it over about 10 to 15 years just here and there. And then my other thing, which is just me, because again, the perfectionist thing, right? I want to do a good job. I will edit the crap out of something. I probably took a year just editing it, just rereading it, editing it, wordsmithing. And finally, at some point, I said, pencils down, just put it out there.
Is this your magnum opus, or you think you got another one in you, Rick?
In terms of nonfiction, so I wasn't going to get into this. I've written a couple of fiction books.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't tell you that. I was totally prepped to do this because I'm a good writer and because I'd already written 2 fiction books. To me, this was, look, it's a business book. It's a little less fun to write, but I was ready to go just because I am, pretty adept at writing.
Yeah.
One of the key things for me, and we didn't even throw out the title. So the title's called Demystifying the Role of the CFO in Venture and Growth Stage Companies. I'm only putting it out on print because I think that's the way this book should be experienced. I'm not kidding. And it's on Amazon. If you are like a first-time CFO or aspire to be a CFO for early-stage companies, if you're a CEO or founder of an early-stage company, if you're a venture capitalist, I think this is a good book for you to read because there is stuff you will learn somewhere in this book. I can almost guarantee that. But the other thing is for a business book, especially one that maybe sounds a little dry, it's actually a really fun read because I'm a fiction writer, right? So I've made it fun to read. But also I peppered the book with a lot of funny stories just from my career. Ask any CFO who's been doing this job for a couple decades. They will have reams of funny stories of stuff they saw or crazy situations they were in. And this book is peppered with those stories. So it's actually a fun read. My 12-year-old son looked at the title and said, who'd possibly read that? Well, my wife, who doesn't know anything about business, started reading it. And she's like, this is actually a really fun read. I can read it. And I'm like, I know, great. That's what I was trying to accomplish here.
We'll link to the book in the show notes so everybody can get a copy. You got to give us one story from the book. What was your favorite?
There's a lot of good ones. I'll tell you one.
Just one.
So I was new at a company and I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang. And the guy calling me explained that my company had previously employed him and that when he joined the company had lent him $20,000 to facilitate his relocation. And then he left the company, so he had a loan from the company that he owed. So he was calling me to find out how much he owed in total, including interest, because he wanted to pay the money back. And I got to be honest, I didn't skip a beat. And I told him, don't worry about the interest at all. If you can just come by the company today and drop off a check for $20,000, we will consider the debt repaid in full. And when I hung up, I said to myself, I have no idea what this guy is talking about. because the money that he said he owed the company, it was nowhere on the company's books. So this event, him joining the company, getting the loan and leaving, must have happened at some point in the past, but somehow that $20,000 in cash went out the door and was nowhere on the books. So I'm a pretty good accountant, and in my head, I don't know how stuff like this happens, yet it did. So because we had been reconciling the company's cash monthly since I'd been with the company, the $20,000, it had to have previously gone out the door, and instead of booking it as an employee receivable, they must have just expensed the whole thing, which means nobody was reviewing the financial statements because somebody should have said, hey, why are we off by $20,000 in this month? And the only reason this $20,000 was coming back to the company was because the $20,000 picked up the phone, called me and said, I want to come home.
If it was a boat, it wouldn't have called you.
No. But there's so many just funny stories you see over time. I could do this for days, but especially when you do M&A or operate internationally, there's just so many funky things that happen where you roll your eyes and you're just like, oh my God, how'd that happen?
We were doing an M&A due diligence checklist, and one of the questions was like, does the company have any like horse trailers that it owns on behalf of the owners? And I'm like, no, but like the fact that you're asking me that means that somebody must have purchased a horse trailer at some other company.
Oh my God, that is crazy. I mean, so I had an M&A deal blow up on the night before it was supposed to close. You know how heartbreaking that is.
Oh.
And they broke up with us via email. It was like a one sentence email saying, hey, we're not going to get this deal done. We worked for 6 months on that deal. It was just heartbreaking to have that happen. Internationally, there's so many weird things that happen internationally. I mean, I'll give you a quick story. We had staff on the ground in a Middle Eastern country, and it turned out the staff had to vacate the country like once every 30 days or 60 days. And this was a very common occurrence. They would literally get on a plane, leave the country, have their passport stamped, turn around and fly back and have their passport stamped back in. And that was fine. They had to go through that exercise to please whoever. Or in China, we had employees working on site at a company, but China required us to have like a physical location. And so we rented a few square feet of, I don't even know what it looked like in an office, just we rented a few square feet. So we would have an address. Like I'm envisioning a whole floor of just square feet that people rented so they could have a physical address in China. It was crazy. I'm like, I'm paying money for, I don't even know what it is. I've never seen it before. It doesn't exist. It's square feet.
Check the box.
Yeah, there's just so many things like that happen that, you take international business in business school, you're never going to learn any of this stuff. It's just bizarre.
All right. Well, everyone will go and get the book, but I got to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So the first question I ask all the CFOs that come on the pod, give us something you've screwed up before on the job.
So there's a whole chapter in my book about leases, and you might say, oh God, who's going to read that? No, if you're going to lease space, read this. And the reason why I say this is because I had never done a major lease negotiation or headquarters build out before. And there's so many unique aspects to it. And this was a big deal. It was 50,000 square feet. It was a 7 to 10 year lease. It was like a lot of money. And there's so much new vocabulary to learn and so many decisions to be made. And between the build out plus the furnishings and all the technology, costs can spiral out of control if you're not careful. And every day I felt like the dumb money at the poker table in every single real estate meeting I was in. And I will freely admit that I was in over my head on that first build out, and I didn't exactly kick ass on it. I wouldn't say it was screwed up, but I would say that I didn't exactly kick ass on that. And that was a big time lease. And I think it might have been 10 years. And it was like any mistake I made was going to be there for 10 years. It was not fun.
Out of all the leases that you've undertaken, how many of them do you actually get to move in on time?
Usually 0. It's very hard to hit the timeline, and a lot of it's out of your control.
Yeah.
Because again, you're just like a house reno, right? You're dealing with contractors and permitting and all sorts of stuff like that. So the likelihood of it opening on time is probably pretty low. The cost is really tough because, first of all, there's a million things that go into building out a space. And I remember a facilities person told me this once. They looked at me and said, blinds. And I was like, what about blinds? She's like, you have no idea how much blinds cost and how many windows are in these spaces.
It's a racket.
Blinds. Yeah, blinds. And I was like, really? So now I pay attention to blinds. But what happens sometimes is CEO, they want to build a monument sometimes. And so they will start to spend, and it can reverberate. And I go through this in the book. It's like, steel's expensive. Glass offices are expensive. Drywall is cheap. Focus on drywall. You know what's really cheap? Open offices with tons of air. Air is cheap. So the cost can spiral. And if you stay on top of it and you can control the CEO, then you can bring these things in on budget. But otherwise, it's amazing how fast costs can spiral. And this is in an era now where people build out some really cool offices, marble, this, and hey, we need a bar, we need a stage, we need this, costs can really spiral. It's just being super careful. The other thing I always encourage people to do, first of all, is before you build out a space, when you're small, can you do a WeWork? Can you do a sublease? Subleases are great. It's not going to be what you want, but boy, it's going to be a lot less expensive than building out. Plus, you won't be locked in for 7 to 10 years. It might be a 2 or 3 or 4 year sublease. Great. It might come furnished. Great, even better. But the thing I always encourage somebody is, first of all, if you're negotiating a long-term lease, can you negotiate into it an out clause where you can exit at the 5 or 7 year mark? The problem is from the landlord's perspective, when they work their math, that is the last thing they want on their books, is that you might exit at 5 to 7 years, because they assume you will exit when they're doing their math. But the other thing I always encourage people is, when you are designing the space, designing it in a way where it can be carved up and individual segments can be broken off and subleased. Because if things don't work out according to plan, that is your best tool to solve it. And it can be hard. You have to design the space up front to be carved up and subleased. If you don't do that ahead of time, it's really hard sometimes to carve up the space later. So design it to be carved up and subleased.
That last bit was sage advice. That guards your
downer
downside.
too, right? It's like a prenup in a marriage. But I 100% pound my fist on the table on that topic when doing a build out. Design it to be carved up and subleased just in case.
If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
I would tell young Smitty to mellow out.
Chill out.
Yeah, chill out. A lot of times, I was told this a lot of times when I was younger. I had the right ideas, but I had the wrong approach. I'd come charging in and nobody wanted to deal with me. And I've really mellowed out, smile a lot more. I'm more even keel when I have conversations with folks. It's a lot of times it's not what you're saying, it's how you say it. And I've gotten really good at doing that. And I've also just gotten a lot better at focusing on building relationships and making sure, again, that people have that faith and that trust in me and they want to deal with me, versus a CFO who nobody wants to talk to, who's a downer, who's aggressive. Nobody wants to deal with that person. So young Smitty, mellow out.
I love that. You work with a lot of companies who are evaluating software for their tech stacks. Where's your head at these days for the companies that you work with? What's the tech stack you recommend?
Yeah, so this will be a little bit of a letdown. Most of my early stage companies, they don't have a lot of budget, but they also don't have a ton of complexity. And so, most of them have deployed QuickBooks, which is a crappy product. And usually they've deployed QuickBooks poorly, which means like their chart of accounts is designed really poorly to not give you insights into the business. So a lot of times I'm stuck with QuickBooks, and that's fine. I've learned to live around it, but I'll try to find ways to redesign their poorly designed chart of accounts in a way that will be of more value when I'm trying to dissect what's going on in the business. If they're not on stuff like a Bill.com or a Ramp, I will push them in those directions. I actually love Bill.com. It's such a great product. And then, one thing that is super useful is if you are employing international employees, to look at like a global PEO. And the one I've used a lot is remote.com. You can employ people globally with remote.com. It's super easy and it's actually pretty cost effective. And so I've gone a lot of times in that direction, which is really helpful, because 20 years ago when that didn't exist, it was really hard to hire global employees. So I think most people listening to this might be a little let down, because early stage companies a lot of times are not on some cutting edge stack. They can't afford it. They don't want to do it. And I'm fine living within the confines of, let's get the accounting right and get the right people, and then we can focus on the technology and the platforms. A technology platform is never going to solve for bad data, bad people, bad information.
We had Michelle Board, the CFO of Remote, on, and I've been a customer of them too. And it just makes it takes out a lot of, we had some shady dealings with places over in the Ukraine hiring people, and they helped us expand and correct what we were doing amongst like 12 different countries. It was a game changer.
Yeah, I think if you're, first of all, I think remote.com and a lot of these other ones are great. If you're going to employ a bunch of employees in a single country, then I might look for something beyond remote.com, and the employees might want it. They might demand it. But if I have employees in 5 different countries, whatever, all day long, go use a global PEO. Your life will be so much better.
Yeah, save yourself a ton of headaches. Like trying to establish a legal entity for 5 employees is a fool's errand.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story on that topic. Private equity firm I was working with asked me to speak to one of their CFOs about globally hiring, or about hiring in general. So CFO calls me and she says, my CEO wants me to hire people anywhere for any job. And I was like, well, God, in the US, I mean, if you're hiring people in certain markets, there are a couple markets it's really a pain, and then you have to establish an entity maybe in the state. And she said, no, I'm not talking about in the US. He meant globally. And I was like,
as if Washington State and New York State weren't bad enough.
Yeah, California.
Yeah,
California is the one I always gravitated straight towards. I was like, what? So entry-level position, and you have somebody apply from Romania, you're just going to set up an entity and figure it out, or use remote? What? No. Tell them no. Like, I'm nervous enough to do that in the US, but you want to do that globally? No, there should be a logic and reason to what you're trying to do, and there should be some math behind it. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense at all.
Couldn't agree more. Last one I got for you, more of a fun one. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
Oh, I've seen some crazy stuff. I'm going to give you one that always shocks people. I had a really high-paid executive submit an expense report for a single stamp. How much is a stamp these days? Back then, it was like 32 cents or something like that. And he bothered to submit an expense report for that stamp. And this person was making big bucks.
Oh,
it was shot. My staff looked at me and they were just like, what's
says so much about them.
I always say that you can learn a lot about people by reviewing their expense reports and seeing what they submit. And it's a little shocking. I mean, that same exec, again, makes a lot of money. They submitted a McDonald's expense report for McDonald's that was under $3. And I was like, really? There's all these studies that'll tell you, like, just to process an expense report, especially back then when it was more paper-based, it was like $8 to $10. And this guy submitted for a stamp and, fries and a drink at McDonald's. It's like, really?
We had Stephen Grist. He's a 7-time CFO. And he was saying that the craziest thing he had someone try to expense that was podcast appropriate was a single banana. And it was an executive. And we called it the banana in the coal mine because once he dug into like, WTF, why is this guy expensing a banana? He found like vacations they had expensed and like all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah, I often say that an employee will never be any better than they are during the recruiting process. And so, like, if we're recruiting an executive and they're really painful to deal with in the recruiting process when they should be at their best, they're only going to get worse the day after you hire them. And you can judge a lot based on what people will submit expenses for. I mean, I'm always really surprised. But that stamp, that was so in character for that executive. I'm not going to say who it was.
Very on brand.
It was incredibly on brand for that executive that person would have done that. Shocking.
Rick, this has been a blast. For the benefit of listeners, would you just mind plugging one more time the book you wrote in your practice?
I will. It is called Demystifying the Role of the CFO in Venture and Growth Stage Companies. It is available in print only on Amazon.
Cool. And they can find Bonfire. What's the website?
I actually don't have a website. I've never needed one. So Bonfire Advisory is my fractional CFO practice. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I've been told a million times, why don't you have a website? Because I haven't needed one. I set this up 2.5 years ago, like before fractional CFOs were a thing. And I've never had a shortage of clients. So I've never bothered to set up a website.
Cool. Rick, this has been incredible. We got to have you on for part 2. You're a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.